How localized and self-sufficient are you right around your particular area there? How self-autonomous could you be if your region just got cut off, or for some reason global trade stopped for a few years?
We try and be as self-sufficient as we can on our own property. In the event of a collapse, like if we're talking about prepping here, you could get past the first 6 months without, having to really venture off too much. The entire system is going to be different.
Yeah, like you live in a more rural setting, and so do I. So how localized and self-sufficient are you right around your particular area there? Now, I understand without the big, foundries, we're not going to have steel to be able to produce automobiles, but that's going to be there's enough used stuff around to get us through the next 5 or 10 years. But in terms of locality and being able to produce what you need for your own lumber, obviously there's a lot of sawmills around you, and you got a lot of food production around there. How self-autonomous could you be if your region just got cut off, or for some reason global trade stopped for a few years? I mean, are you self-autonomous out there enough with everybody helping each other to move through with the basic necessities like we did in the 1860s?
We know people within several hours of us that we communicate with, which could be a problem if you don't have a car. But there are other options. There are horses. There are other things that you could rely on to be able to create trading paths with others. But we try and be as self-sufficient as we can on our own property. For example, you can't with the amount of acreage we have, if you actually were to add up how much food you'd have to grow to feed a family of five every single year, how much corn that takes, how much wheat that takes for flour. I mean, it would become a full-time job to be able to produce enough food, and you need a lot of acreage. But you can do things like what we've done is we've added rabbits to our kind of our mix that we have going on here, because you can repopulate rabbits fairly quickly. It becomes a protein source that you can harvest on your own very easily. It's not like having to get a bunch of people out to harvest a cow or a hog. But then we also still have those larger animals. So, we kind of look at it as from the standpoint of, if we can at least provide food for our family, food and water, if we have those things, we can try and adapt to the rest. And I'm sure that, somebody was talking to me, they were like, in the event of a collapse, like if we're talking about prepping here, if you could get past the first 6 months without, having to really venture off too much, the entire system is going to be different after that period of time. Within that short window of time, so much will change in society. And then, that would be the best time to venture out and start figuring out new systems, but, not before then.
Yeah, I agree. Because, taking a larger animal too. So we buy our live weight animals from the Amish, and slaughtering it, you wouldn't want to take a full calf. We got a 490-pound calf last time. We did it during the winter months because, that's an enormous amount of meat for two people to process. It's a 3-day event, trying to render the fat, trying to save the bones for the dogs, trying to get the different cuts, wrap it, label it, get it in the freezer. If it's warm out during the summer, there's no way you're going to be able to harvest that. And then the lamb we got last time was like 115 pounds. And it still took 5 hours, 6 hours to get that done. So without refrigeration and the way, if you're going to do something larger like that, you got to think about the spoilage just before you even are able to get it packed. And if your freezers are running, and then what happens if you lose freezers because the electricity's out? Then we're back to, you got your hot plate boiler out there, or some kind of a gas burner, so you can start canning up everything. 12 cans at a time on a pressure cooker to save your meat. I mean, how much would that slow you down versus putting it in freezer wrapper paper and then labeling it and putting it in the freezer? So, I mean, you're talking orders of magnitude in difficulty if you're going to be canning up an entire animal versus, processing it into the steaks and grinding some of it for the burger, or keeping some of our cubes for stir fry, etc. Huge levels in between there, especially if you bring back where we lost refrigeration. It's difficult to get a root cellar out here. It's just so wet here in East Tennessee. Every time you dig into the ground, if you get anywhere, it just starts to seep. There's a huge amount of moisture coming out. I'm sure you have the same problem. Like, to take us back to the pioneering lifestyle, there's going to be a lot of changes people aren't used to. Diets will definitely change. So look how they're trying to get us to shift our diets now, not so much to insects, but going away from meat, getting more vegan and holistic and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's changes inbound, and I'm sure every government sees it, and they're trying to, I don't know, is it really lessening the shock and the blow by getting you to get off meat? Or are they just trying to give people hopefulness? It's like the sinking of the Titanic. Like, stand in the front deck, you'll be okay. Don't eat steak, just get over in the front of the deck there. Absurd these days why we're not just training everybody instantly to be self-sufficient.
It's the push away from meat is something that concerns me, because when you talk about some of these longer term cycles in our climate system, and we were discussing yields and how they haven't really moved since 2016. We haven't really seen, for decades, we saw massive growth in crops because of the introduction of GMOs, different fertilizers, and then we kind of hit this peak point right before a lot of this happened. But if you want to farm land and you want to grow food, something we've realized is that you've got to replenish your soil. You can't just keep growing in it year after year after year without offering some sort of cycle to it. And something that I feel everybody could do if they learned it is they could utilize their animals to regenerate their own soil. On our property, we've got, even with our rabbits, where they pretty much live in confinement. Our rabbits are a type of rabbit that's not used to kind of roaming. But we collect, their waste, and we put it onto our vegetable garden. We collect all of that and reuse it. It seems like setting people up to reduce their livestock and get rid of these animals is creating a long-term environmental problem when it comes to being able to utilize our soil and keep growing. I mean, even those who are trying to do it without animals are either mimicking the animals by bringing in machines that stomp and grind into the ground, or they're bringing in manure from somewhere else, or they're buying Bill Gates's, synthetic microbials to put into the soil. One thing or the other, they're still trying to mimic what those animals do. So to be truly self-reliant and self-sufficient, you've got to have, those resources, and then you've got to manage them, which, means culling them at the right times.
Let me ask you a question. Like, how hot is that rabbit dung compared to chicken dung or chicken chop?
Yeah, it's not hot at all. You can take rabbit dung and put it directly onto your garden. Whereas with chicken, we scrape out our chicken house and we'll put that into the compost because it's too hot. If you put it on there, it's going to burn it. But and then obviously our chickens roam. We don't do anything with that. It just kind of fertilizes, but that's all spread out, because they're not in a concentrated area. But like a chicken house that they go into, a coop that they go into every night, if you were to just take a shovel of that, put it on a garden, you'd kill your plants. But you mix it in with your compost, and it creates some good soil down the road. Yeah.
So let me go a little bit more into Joel Salatin's place out there in Virginia. They run the cattle through the pasture first to do exactly what you're talking about. They chomp up the grass, they kick it, their hooves are in there, they're breaking it apart, and they're leaving the dung behind. So they leave that there. After the cattle are in there, they'll let it go for usually about a week or so, because they want the worms to start getting into the cow manure. And then they'll move rollable chicken coops behind it. So then the chicken really get in there and break all that apart and scratch. And if you leave chicken too long, you're definitely going to get a brown bare area. But then once, 2 days passes or so, and those chickens have scratched up and flattened everything and done and eaten all the insects and hopefully gotten the pests out of the grass, then they move it to the next square and they just pull it by, square by square, day by day. And it's a rotation basis where they got the broiler chickens just strictly for meat, but then they also have a laying mobile, if you will. It's a bunch of nesting boxes and a movable, they call the chicken mobile. A bunch of nesting boxes, and then the ramps come down and they can come out and forage around. But they do the same thing with turkey, and it's a rotation. Cow first, bird second. You should see the lushness. I've never seen grasses in field this lush before. It is like Ireland magic green in Virginia. Now, Virginia is pretty lush anyway, but I mean, it is like levels above anything we saw driving in or out of the place. The green is like the most magic emerald, like Irish green you've ever seen in their fields. I was astonished at what I saw. And like, yeah, it's like this all the time. Just rotate everything through and you can get these abundant yields. And their grasses are just, they don't sell it, but it's a much more preferable grass going to hay for the nutrients and that sort of thing inside there, protein on the seeds, etc.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's comes down to, it's more than just, well, if you look at cow dung, it's watery. So those nutrients are immediately available to the soil environment. I mean, it's kind of like an aquatic environment if you consider how many species are in a handful of soil, and microbials. But it's more than just that. It's also the dandruff of the animals, the feathers, the all of that is adding back to the biodiversity of that space that they just, went through and left. So it's actually a very fascinating thing. But I feel like, if we're looking at sustainability, and sustainability has taken on so many different meanings over the years, it's kind of almost a bad word to say sometimes. But if you think about just the basis of what sustainability means, the ability to go back, replenish, reuse again and again, and plan for the future, you can't do it without them. I mean, that's the natural development of that space. It's always had animals on it. And even when you look at woodlands, we used to have large ungulates in woodlands. If I were to go to the North Carolina mountains and look at, those forests today, they're overgrown. They're probably respirating more CO2 than they're taking in, because the trees are too close together. You don't have the big giant trees that you would have had before we logged it out. So even our national forests that are supposed to be this great, wonderful environmental thing aren't actually benefiting as far as that's concerned.
yeah, not to mention the fire hazard too. Because my neighbor's property, it's been for sale. Well, it's in a trust and they're never going to sell it, but they never come and take care of it. So where I'm cleaning the forest floor, because I know with a fire hazard, you step over there and they got like 1,000-hour fire stuff laying everywhere. So I mean, if that were to catch, those logs would burn for weeks just laying on the forest floor there. And you can't have that kind of fire hazard. Fire is part of the regenerative process too, although it's damaging. But how able are you to control a fire that you want to set into a small area to clear it out? Burning brush is one thing, but setting a field or part of the forest on fire to get it to regenerate or drop seed or, take out the small undergrowth to leave just the largest stuff. And that's danger area there unless you got a full crew. That's not really workable for most people. It is if you have your own private fire department, but the forest management today is substandard, then the pests that are coming through and destroying so many trees everywhere around here in East Tennessee. You go up to Cades Cove, there's so many trees have fallen down. I mean, they haven't really managed the pests that well either. So whether it be the pine beetles, the bark beetles, there's like everything's getting under the wood now. There's so many types of pests that are uncontrollable, and it's hitting almost every tree species now. The bark is getting, you just watch, it's almost like peeling off, even like oak trees, ash trees, of course, the pines, whatever. They're all being inundated. The chestnut trees, the cherry trees, the walnut trees, there is splitting barks off too everywhere. There's a pest to hit nearly every single tree. And, I got this huge row of cedars out here, but there's also a bunch of persimmon trees that are in there trying to poke their heads out. So I'm slowly trimming around, not to gouge it, but trim around to expose the persimmon trees. And man, they just take off really fast. And trying to get that target species out and change the cedar over into a fruit bearing kind of forest in front. But I'm really trying to curate the different nut species trees too on the property. But with all these pests and borers and these things, I mean, I don't know. Some of them seem to have been, I'm going to say, and maybe it's a little contentious, but I'm saying a lot of this stuff maybe wasn't taken care of as quickly as it could have been. And now it's run away, and I'll leave it at that. But it's destroying an enormous amount of food bearing, wild foraging opportunities for most of us out here.